Well, welcome back to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Holmes, and I am back again with a wonderful and amazing guest. This week's guest is Dr. Terry Marsh. Dr. Marsh is, first of all, a veteran of the United States Army, so we thank him for his service. He is also a specialist in the area of journalism, photojournalism, and broadcasting. Today, as an assistant professor of the Department of Mass Communication and Journalism at the Norfolk State University. Can't forget that y'all. Dr. Marsh has a strong interest in African-American media ownership issues and in fair representation in media content. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Terry Marsh. So Marsh, I am excited about this interview. I think I'm going to learn a lot in this interview with you, but I also, as I just shared, this topic is one of strong interest right now in America as we talk about media, its influence in cultures and communities, and exactly as you talk about, and one of your interests, fair representation, especially in the African-American community, and ownership and self-representation. So we're going to dive right into this interview, Dr. Marsh. So First, let's start by talking about, describe who was this young Dr. Terry Marsh?
The young Dr. Terry Marsh was not a doctor at all. And my journey to becoming a doctor was somewhat a much rounded journey. My curiosity as a child always had me asking questions. I wanted to know why things were the way that they were. I would say that my mother was a huge influence because my mother was an English teacher. So she would correct my grammar all the time. I never wanted to take papers home because my mother would redline my papers, and I would correct me in front of my friends. So my mother was a huge influence, but probably more so than anything, my mother was a storyteller. She would read to us. She would read all types of stories to us. I mean, from Greek classics to stories written by African Americans. And she would act those stories out and put emphasis on certain things while she told us stories. So I think that was my one of the greatest influences to me. I would always envision those stories. I would always visualize those stories. In later years, I wanted to make those stories a little bit more real. So I would try to figure out ways to see those stories as something that was creative. Now, my brother was an artist, and my brother could draw out things. So we would do things together, and I would try to tell the story, and he would try to draw them out. But while I was in high school, I developed a passion for photography. And learning how to shoot, what to shoot, and framing and framing content specifically, I learned a lot about how to tell a story visually. So I think that was a huge impact in helping me to develop an interest or a passion for communication arts, particularly media arts.
You know, I'm listening to you talk about your mother, and I know you have a strong passion with representation. Do you think that her making sure that you spoke correct grammar was a way that to ensure that you were presenting yourself in a proper way or a way in which it should have been respected among other people?
Absolutely, without a doubt. My mother grew up in North Carolina, and she graduated from Hampton University. It was Hampton Institute when she graduated. But she never let me forget it. And my mother could not go to graduate school anywhere in the South. At the time when she graduated from Hampton, in order to get a PhD, you had to go north. There were no schools in Virginia. There were no schools in south of Maryland, I believe, that would allow African Americans to attend graduate programs.
Wow.
My mother went north. She got her master's degree from NYU. She got her PhD from Boston University. And I think that was an inspiration for me. She made sure that we knew how to communicate wherever we were. Now, granted, I have a lot of cousins that are that are from the hood. So I think that it was from a very early age, I learned the difference. And of course, we didn't call it code switching then, but from a very early age, I knew how to be one of the boys. But at the same time, I could go into any environment and be able to express myself in a manner in which I could connect with people.
Yeah.
And I think I still do that today to a large extent, even though I consider myself being me all the time. And that is being me.
Yeah.
It is being me.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's not that I'm trying to be anything other than I am. It is me being Terry Marsh.
Yeah. So talk about what led you into the military.
I wanted to serve, and I knew that I wanted to serve, but I also had a lot of one of my cousins, who was probably one of the greatest influences on me socially, had gone into the Navy, and I think when he would come home in that Navy uniform, it would inspire me in some way. I also grew up in a Navy town, Norfolk, Virginia. So we always saw the military as a part of the community. I just knew that at some point in my life that I wanted to serve, but I didn't want to go in and dig trenches and carrying rifles. I was carrying, and being shot at all the time, even though I was. I wanted to be able to tell the stories of those individuals in the military. So I went to DINFOS, Defense Information School. I became a military journalist initially. And I was writing stories for military publications around the country. I did a lot of writing for Army Times. And my love of photography came to play. I became a military journalist. I became a combat journalist. I loved shooting. I passionately love shooting. I've shot from the skids of helicopters. I've shot while jumping. I've just always found that exciting. And I just knew this was something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. And I can hear the storyteller in you, even as you answer that question, because now I'm getting these visuals of this photojournalist in the Navy taking these amazing shots, jumping from helicopters. And I mean, that just sounds totally amazing. So first of all, again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Definitely a selfless act. And to be such a young man, knowing that you just wanted to serve, to me, is very admirable. So thank you again for that.
Thank you.
So you learned a lot of skills there. You never lost sight of what you were interested in, and you let that translate even into your military career. So then you decide to exit the military, and then where do you land next?
Well, it's interesting because my last command was at Fort McPherson, Georgia. And while I was at Fort McPherson, I was doing various things like some voiceover work in local radio. But the funny thing is that Fort McPherson actually is where Tyler Perry Studios are now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is where I exited the military. So I actually got out of the military primarily because I was presented with an offer from a local concert promoter. I don't know, can I say his name? I'll say it. His name was Leonard Rowe, and at the time he had a company called Rowe Productions. Had a lot of R&B acts on tour, acts like Patti LaBelle, Confunction. I don't know if you guys even know who Confunction is. Ohio Players, but some of the bigger acts were Patti LaBelle, Luther Vandross. He was able to get the Michael Jackson tour with the Off the Wall album, and then things just kind of blew up from there. So I would say tour publicist. I would go in and promote the show primarily before the show actually arrived in specific cities. I was writing the promos. I was actually voicing some of the commercial spots. And it was an exciting time. I was at that time still a young man, and it was a very exciting time. I've worked with, again, Michael Jackson, Prince, Luther Vandross. And interestingly, when I was teaching at Howard University, I had his niece, Luther Vandross' niece, in one of my classes. And her mother actually had a picture of me. So that was really interesting. They presented me with some home video of Luther. I mean, it was really a touching experience. This was obviously after he passed. So yeah, I mean, you know, my I guess my career kind of felt like it came full circle at that point.
Yeah. Now I'm sitting here kind of envious. Let's just be honest. Now you're jumping out of planes, you're taking pictures, you're traveling with Luther Vandross and Patti LaBelle. I mean, gee, this is a great life.
It seemed that way. I mean, quite honestly, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of hard work. But I think one of the things that I learned from that is you develop a mastery of skills. And I learned in the military, I did a little of everything from voiceover work. I had a jazz program on one of the base stations. I was always a photojournalist, always a writer. And I think that those skill sets actually transitioned. Once I transitioned out of the military, those skill sets actually came into play for me tremendously. I was always that individual. I never really worked, and I never liked the idea of working a 9 to 5. I liked the idea of being passionate about what I did. And I think that kind of bubbled over and really opened the door to some of the experiences that I was able to have once I transitioned from the military.
And I know, I'm very sure that all of those experiences, as you got into higher ed and began to teach, really brought some context to what you were sharing with students based on what you were teaching them in the classroom.
Well, I think tremendously. One of the I've also worked at a number of television stations and radio stations around the country. I've worked in Atlanta. I've worked in Dallas, New Orleans. I worked in upstate New York. And I think having those real world experiences and being able to translate real world experiences rather than theoretical, you know, I'll be honest, I've worked in a lot of stations. I've worked for CBS for a number of years. Nobody ever came to me and asked me about a theory. However, they would ask, can this get done? Can you do this? Can you edit this? And that was all they were concerned about. So when I became, I don't even know when the transition happened. I know that when my mother became ill, I was actually working in New York, WBLK in Buffalo, New York. My mother became ill, and I was coming back and forth to Virginia. My mother had a stroke, and then 47 days later, she had a second stroke. After the second stroke, I took a leave of absence, and I was kind of asked to if I'd be interested in adjuncting some courses. And I said, well, you know what? I need to do something other than being in the hospital all day.
Right.
And I really developed a connection with students. I think that the strongest connection was in that, you know, I could tell students exactly what they needed to do to get a job.
Yeah.
In media. And once a few students started to transition into the real world, and I still have connections with those students. I have students who just graduated last semester who stay in touch with me. I mean, some who stay in touch with me every few weeks, share the content that they're developing, share the stories that they're working on. Those are the things that I find have given me a greater sense of self-worth than anything that I ever did running around the country. To see the development of young minds, the development of young people acquiring those skill sets really moves me.
Wow.
I have students who are working right now, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Alabama. I have a student who is an anchor in Birmingham, Birmingham, Alabama. I actually have, to me, this is an interesting story. I think that one of the biggest challenges I have a lot of times is to help students to find their career path. Some students come in and, they come to college and just looking for a career. Their only goal is to make money.
Yeah.
But I had a student who graduated in 2020. She came to me, at the time I was her advisor, and she came to me with, she had no idea what she wanted to do beyond graduation. None whatsoever. I suggested graduate school for her. And she said, no, I'm not. She was a student athlete. She said, no, I'm not acquiring. I'm not accumulating any debt. I don't want to do that. And I said, well, there may be some ways for you to go to graduate school without accumulating debt. Why don't we take a look at maybe potentially some programs that have a TA-ship? And if you have any listeners who don't know what a TA-ship is, it's a teaching assistantship. And she said, okay, well, if you could find one, then I might be interested. So we found a few. And we found one at the University of the Pacific. And she said, well, I've never been to California. That was the spark.
Right.
I knew I had to use that as the spark. And she applied. She got accepted and stayed in touch. I mean, there wasn't a month that went by that she did not stay connected with me. This same young lady that had, and she's from Detroit, this same young lady that had no clue as to what she wanted to do, just about a month and a half ago, accepted a job as a communications assistant for Conference USA, and based in Dallas. So that to me is a huge success story, and I'm very proud of her as well.
Yeah, I see that you're definitely invested in supporting your students. And I think that's a big part of what higher ed needs to be doing. I mean, I think at the end of the day, students are customers. We're there to give them a service and to show them our knowledge and our experiences. And I think what you're doing is is a model for a lot of what should be happening in a lot of institutions all over the world, honestly. So you did a lot of traveling. So how in the world did you fit in a doctorate degree into your life?
Well, actually, I had some mentors who pointed me in that direction. I had, I'd acquired a bachelor's degree, and graduate school wasn't on my radar. And I had some people that said, you should maybe consider graduate school, and maybe there may be a place for you in higher education. Now, honestly, my mother taught school for 42 years. I had no interest, desire. I could not even see myself in that space. However, I always related teaching school to secondary education.
Yeah.
And I knew I was not going to be, particularly after serving in the military, I was not going to have some 14-year-old kid stand in my face and tell me what they were and were not going to do.
Right.
But I'd never thought of higher education. Mm-hmm. So I started graduate school. I started teaching, adjuncting some classes, and I became a TA for, and I'm going to say her name because she still guides me. Her name is Dr. Dorothy Jones. She is still here at Norfolk State University. And she kind of led me in the direction of graduate school. And once I finished, I was close to finishing graduate school. And she said, well, no, you're not done yet. And what do you mean I'm not done yet? At this point, I mean, granted, I was a non-traditional student at this point.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you know what, I've got a military pension. I have other things. And at the time, I also had my own business, and I was doing a lot of photography, videography. I had some corporate clients and things like that. And I'm thinking, what do you mean I'm not done yet? And she convinced me that there were students with whom I could connect and have a greater impact. So she opened the idea of getting a PhD, and both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree are from Norfolk State. And at that time, I owned a home here in the Hampton Roads area. Didn't want to venture too far away. Mm-hmm. So I only applied to 2 programs, and one was University of North Carolina, the other was Howard University. I was accepted at both. However, I started thinking about the University of North Carolina would not accept my method. Mm-hmm. And that was the big motivation for me to stay with HBCUs.
Yeah.
So I attended Howard. I graduated from Howard, and I've been at Norfolk State ever since.
Wow. So you definitely have a strong passion for representation. So I want you to share a little bit about that, especially representation in the Black community, and then you talk about self-representation as well.
Well, absolutely. One of the things, and from a historical point of view, we have always, as African Americans, been misrepresented in traditional media and what we call legacy media. As a matter of fact, it goes all the way back to the days of slavery. Even slave posters had exaggerated features of African Americans, exaggerated lips, exaggerated noses. And then even as we transitioned out of slavery, we became the laughingstock of vaudeville because of blackface and the way that we were represented by white folks as caricatures.
Yes.
That I always had a problem with. I've always had a problem with that. Even in the film Birth of a Nation, the African American chasing the white woman was a white man in blackface.
Yeah.
And I always had a problem with that. I always had a problem with our being misrepresented. There were a lot of individuals out trying to fight the fight that particularly the NAACP petitioned against the film Birth of a Nation. Nobody listened to us during that time. So I've always wanted to be able to identify, first of all, that these aren't a correct representation of who we are. Mm-hmm. I commend those, the early advocates of representing us in certainly a more positive light, but that never crossed. It never got out of the Black community.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even though the range of African Americans was very broad, the image of us was basically the step and fetch it image.
Yes.
There's a lot of work done by Donald Bogle, who's pretty much an African American media historian, and he identified that the majority of characters being played by African Americans were the mammies, how did he identify them? Mammies, coons, eventually became the mammies, coon, and what now is a thought. Mm-hmm. Those were, obviously the brute type image, someone that we should obviously, or most whites would obviously fear.
Yeah.
And, the unfortunate thing is that when you look at the history of film, even up until about the 1990s, that's what we played. Yeah. Those characters still exist. We were either, loose Black women, Black men who were either had to be feared or we had to make people laugh.
Yeah.
That is not all of who we are, who we can have the possibility to be. One of the other things that always offended me was the fact that whites or people outside of the African-American community shaped who we were supposed to be in public media. And I guess I had questions, always had questions about how the same people that tell us that we have no capacity to read and write are the same individuals who denied us the right to even read the Bible.
Right.
It made no sense to me. So on one hand, you're telling us we don't have the intellectual capacity to do something, that you will kill us. Mm-hmm. You will kill us for doing or attempting to do. So there was always that duplicity in what they thought, what they said that we could do, and then what I think inherently they knew we had the potential to do.
Yeah.
That always bothered me. I always felt that in order to take back our own voices, that we need to present ourselves in the full spectrum of who we are. And we can do that, obviously, through the same sources or resources that they have. But then I became kind of involved with media ownership issues, and I started realizing that we can't really tell our stories in those places because we don't have ownership of those spaces.
Yeah.
They dictate to us what we can and what we cannot say. And even with the Cosby Show and shows during the probably late 80s and into the 90s, we had to be comical.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember there were a few shows that came that were with strong Black characters that never made it because they weren't making those audiences laugh. One of the things that I love about the idea of now that we are in the 21st century and we have an idea that we have the ability to have a voice of our own, we need to be conscious about how we display that voice, because now we are able to cross mediums. And you know what? We're not doing that. Byron Allen is probably the largest. Well, I'm sorry. I think it's Urban One that owns the most Black stations in the country. But when you look at Urban One and look at their viewership, it's us. Yeah. We're telling our own story to us.
Right.
And the same with, BET until and I was actually with CBS. I was with Viacom when they purchased BET. And I also witnessed what they did with BET after that purchase. For about 4 years, they just sat on it, ran reruns. They didn't create any new content. Yet, when they go out and sell, and when they went out to sell advertising, they would always say that, hey, we've got, BET and 72% of Black households watch BET. They would use us for a selling point, but they weren't creating any new content on BET. I thought that was a travesty. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm happy for Robert Johnson walking away with what he walked away with. But at the same time, I just never felt that Viacom had any intention of doing us justice.
Yeah. I listen, growing up in the BET era, I definitely saw a major shift when it was sold.
Right. Oh, definitely. Absolutely.
And I honestly, to this day, because the program was so poor, I don't watch BET now.
Yeah.
I have no clue what's on there.
And very few people are doing that.
And like you said,
very few people are doing that.
The money's being made off advertisement, but in terms of viewership, it's low. The content is in no way connects to the Black community. And if anything, is now trying to be more expansive, that it's not categorically Black entertainment television anymore.
It is not. I think one of the things that that I found interesting was, I think in 2018, Viacom had actually okayed the production of fewer than 10 new programs by 2018. They'd owned BET for about 12, 13, 14 years by that time, but you'd only okay less than 10 new programs.
Wow.
And I just, I find that as a travesty. We were rehashing the old, I can't even think of the football show now, but they showed that every episode about 80 times.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
However, I think that what they were attempting to do, Viacom was attempting to do, was broaden the market with BET programming.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and it is unfortunate that most programming specifically directed toward Black, have the problem of crossing over to, honestly, OWN is dealing with that now, Once she left network television, traditional TV, and started OWN and created content that would have an uplifting experience for the African-American community, advertisers kind of fell away. And that's why she struggled with OWN.
Yeah. Interesting. When I think about how we represent ourselves in media, I instantly go to reality television.
Right. And you know what? That is actually a huge issue for me, because ironically, it wasn't an African-American that came up, even though we had an African-American showrunner at the time. Yeah. It was a traditional production company that came and said, hey, you know what, we're doing these types of shows in other markets. Let's do one here. I think Love and Hip Hop was in New York was the first, and then Love and Hip Hop in Atlanta, and then the Real Housewives of Atlanta. But why do we always have to be at each other's throats to create content with which, are you really balling the way that you say that you're balling? and you really have to be at somebody's throat in order to be on the top of this or that. Why can't we work together, create something that's positive?
Yeah.
And grow from there.
Yeah.
However, there are some young content producers who I think are trying to change that narrative. And I have students come to me with ideas sometimes. I'm like, wow, maybe something like that'll work, and maybe something like that happens. So I do see, I think that even though many of our students have become engaged with that content, I think that they themselves want to be producing content that shows African Americans in a much different light.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are in an era of a generation of people that are very woke, but unfortunately, at the current time, those that have the power and the resources to create programming are still of an older generation.
Oh, without a doubt.
And it's all about money.
Without a doubt.
About money. These kids are saying it's not about the money. I want to make sure I'm sending a message to uplift and create access points for our community.
Without a doubt.
And that's scary for some people.
It does scare some people. And if you look at the history of media, one of the primary functions of media is to inform. And, the unfortunate thing is that they have always informed us of what they wanted us to know.
Yeah.
As opposed to message. And, I think that certain groups of people still to this day get threatened when we extend our own voices, when we exercise the right to have our own voices.
Yeah.
There are groups of people even to this day. We certainly, I remember when President Barack Obama was first inaugurated. And I used to hear this message of a post-racial society. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know. I'm still getting stopped by police for nothing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we're in a post-racial society. I think that as long as we have that generation of individuals who had to become muted after the civil rights era, just because they became muted, did they really change their perspectives of how Blacks and whites can be integrated in society and work towards specific goals together? Yeah. And I myself have had people laugh in my face, and they have different conversations when they're not around someone who's an African American.
Yeah.
And I know that.
Yeah.
I've had people come back to tell me that.
Yeah.
However, I don't give them power. They have no control over my life. I don't give them power. And you know what? I can still work with them, but I know how you really feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the strength in knowing that but you don't have to treat them any differently.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So what's next for you? What do you see yourself moving and shaking, so to speak, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are still in the industry, and I'll give you one example. I have a good friend, Tim Reed, Mr. Tim Reed, who is an actor, director, mm-hmm. producer. He's done everything in the world in industry. He is also a Norfolk State University alum, who still produces wonderful content. As a matter of fact, he is working on introducing a network of stations as of now. But I do a lot of things with his daughter. His daughter is Tori Reed. She has a wonderful podcast called Here's to Life with Tori Reed. She's introduced some of the significant African Americans in media, including her dad and her stepmother, Daphne Maxwell Reed, who was Aunt Viv on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But she's also, people like Anthony Hamilton. She's in, you pretty much name them. She's interviewed them on her podcast. And Tori and I we're very good friends. But she has also taken some of my students as interns.
Awesome.
We have recently discussed the possibility of doing some other things, using her platform or her father's platform. Her father has been a significant contributor to Norfolk State. We were at a film festival recently, and he asked me about students who might be interested in interning as editors. So my thing is, if I can place students in a position where they can get noticed for doing the work that they're capable of doing, then again, I love being able to contribute to the betterment, to the lives of some of the students who are really trying to move forward, but they learn their craft.
Yeah.
I love my students. We have some who are going through the motions. But then there are others who are truly dedicated to learning their craft. And those are the ones who, I've seen some significant success with some of those students. Those are the students who I don't mind writing the letters of recommendation for. I just opened my email this morning. I've got 3 students reaching out to me for letters of recommendation. That to me I feel that's significant, that students look back and say, hey, this is someone who has contributed to my life, to my growth, to my development. And if I can get him to write a letter on my behalf, then it may open some doors for him.
That's amazing. So I see a lot of great things coming up. So Dr. Duncan is still moving, you guys. He's making some things happen, and we are excited about your future, sir. So thank you so much for joining me today on the Black Doctor Talk podcast. I think you have shared a lot of great gems. I think your life story in itself is one that is admirable. It's one that is filled with lessons. And so if they listen intently, I'm sure somebody got something from what you said, sir. So what I want people to do is know where they can go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing. So where can they go to find you?
Well, probably the best place is terrymarsh.net, which provides some of an overview of what I'm doing in academia. But I think there's content on there. Now, I haven't updated in a while, but there's content up there about some of the places I've been, some of the things that I've done. I will say that probably some of the moments that I'm most proud of is I was able a few years ago to share a stage with one of the individuals that I was able to share a stage with was he's an absolute icon and very, I don't even know how to describe it, but very controversial. And that's Mr. Dick Gregory. But I've also been able or lucky enough to share a stage with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and a few others. And those are things in which, I mean, those individuals were icons to me growing up. They were always unafraid to speak their own voices. And so there's, a little content from that. You'll probably see some pictures of me with Mr. Tim Reed and some other individuals in the industry. But that's probably the best place. I will promise to try to update that sometime soon. But also Norfolk State University website. I have in the past created content for the Norfolk State University's website and still doing so in some of the other duties and responsibilities that I have taken on with the university. But the biggest thing that I encourage is check out some of the content of some of my students who we will be sharing in the near future. We actually have a couple of platforms here at the university in which we share student content. So we will probably open that up to broader markets over the next 3 or 4 semesters. So those are some of the things, and I'm extremely proud of the students. And the thing that I will say is, and I probably end with this, is that I encourage the students not to compete with themselves, but to compete with those individuals who in the industry are getting paid to do exactly what they want to be doing.
Yeah.
Because you'll get a lot of yeses from, I have students that, want to produce music videos. And you produce something for your boys on the block and, you're going to get a lot of, oh, that's dope or whatever. But, in the industry, if you're not getting paid, then you're not relevant.
Right.
So you want to make sure that the content that you're producing is of the quality and at the level where somebody can say, hey, you know what? Let's call this individual. Let's bring them in as an AD or assistant director or something, and then grow from there.
Yeah. Well, listen, you guys go out, check out Dr. Marsh, but also go check us out on social media. Follow the Black Doctoral Network. We would love to connect with you and share with you as well. In the meantime, we're going to be signing off, but guess what? I'll be back next week with another amazing guest. So please stay tuned. Until then, guys, be safe, be blessed, and I'll see you next time.